Okay. All right. Okay, so that seems to be happening. All right. Well, had we finished saying hello, or should we just get into the reports?
Maybe we should give a little introduction.
All right.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Well, do you want to kick off, James?
Yeah, I can do. Hi, I'm James from Manchester. I've been working in George's team, the Scanners, and I'm a data engineer. Go on, George.
Hello, everyone. I'm George. We've been working with James in the last couple of reports we've sent. I currently work as a sports scientist / strength and conditioning coach in a football academy currently in Cyprus.
What is the academy, George?
It's the Liverpool International Academy, the branch of Cyprus.
Okay. All right. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Has it been, sorry, Liam.
Sorry.
So has it been the two of you, George and James? Have you been just you, the two active ones in the team?
In the beginning, yes, but now with the addition of Andreas, Sean, and Oli, we're trying to manage the workload for all of us.
Okay, great. All right. Well, that's a nice sports science team to have.
So hello, everyone. My name is Liam. I'm in the Tricky Trees Down Under group with Yassine, Jacob, and Sam. So I'm also an exercise science major in New York City at the moment, studying exercise science. So
great. No, well, you'll be delivering a report. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Harkness. I'm a sports scientist and sports psychologist. I work at Chelsea Football Club. So, who's first?
I don't mind if we start with James.
Right. All right. So, can you share your screen, George?
Yes. So I think, give me a moment, please.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Not
yet. Yeah, I can do now.
Okay.
Nearly there. Okay, got it.
Okay, so this is our cover for the report versus the Cockfosters on 28th of January. So to start with some of our data, we had a bit of a struggle with the data and how to present it to be as clear as possible. So we're trying to create a format that will be as more clear as possible.
Okay.
So if it's a bit of a mess, excuse us for the time being. So in the first graph, we can see the maximum acceleration and deceleration in meters per second squared. So the blue part of the graph is the maximum acceleration that each player achieved in meters per second. The orange one in minus is the maximum deceleration achieved.
Right.
And we can see numbers over the blue ones, which is the total accelerations in green. So we can see the total number of accelerations made. And we've put the red ones in a minus, so they will go under the decelerations, the total decelerations made for each player.
Okay.
If we go to the next graph, we can see the maximum velocity reached and the total high-speed running and sprint efforts made. With high-speed running, we put a range of 19.8 to 25.1 kilometers per hour for high-speed running, and for sprint efforts, anything over 25.2 kilometers per hour regarding sprints.
All right.
So we can see in the blue lines in the graph, this is the maximum speed achieved for each player. And then in orange, we can see the high-speed running efforts, and in red, the sprint efforts made for each player.
Okay.
In the next graph, we can see the total distance in kilometers and the distance in zone 5 and 6. So the total distance is a small label that's on the sides on each player. So we can see 5.7 for, let's say, Aidan Gaffney, Alex Taylor 3.3, and so on. The blue graph is the meters is zone 5. For some reason, our numbers, the data labels didn't show up. That's a mistake from us. I don't know why this happened.
Okay.
And the orange is zone 6, distance in zone 6 in meters. We could fix this pretty quick. So we can see the actual numbers.
Okay.
In the next page, we can see we actually compared the total average outputs for the two games.
Right.
We didn't went individually for the reason that we wanted to have at least 3 games of data so we can see the actual thresholds and baselines of each player, because there's a big difference between accelerations, decelerations, and total distance, as well as some velocities.
Okay.
We can see there's a small difference, minus 1.5 in the average velocity. But if we compare individually player by player in the game, we've seen in the first game that nobody went over 29 kilometers, and in the second game versus Cockfosters, we had some very high speeds.
Yeah.
So we thought that maybe another game will give us a bit more insight in what the players can actually do in terms of velocity.
Okay.
So we compared, as I said, the two games, and we've seen that there was a big difference in total accelerations made, total decelerations made, and total distance per player. We can see in the red, there's a big difference, 21.9, 28.1, and 15.2 for acceleration, deceleration, and total distance, respectively. And after analyzing the data, we came to some assumptions about the game.
Right.
That, let's say, regarding the total accelerations, deceleration, and total distance, we could say that the game wasn't a positive result due to that the players did not have the same number of accelerations, deceleration, and total distance. So the players weren't playing as hard or trying as hard. And what our assumptions were that the players did not press the ball because of the lower number of decelerations.
Okay.
And maybe that was part of the players. Maybe that was a tactic for that game. Maybe the opponent didn't give a chance for the players to fight for the ball.
Okay.
Second one was no space to run with or for the ball. Maybe the opponent was too close in the defense, or the game was a bit too close to each other, as we put in the third point, that both teams were blocking each other due to maybe same strengths and weakness, so we couldn't see what was going on there. And fourth, that maybe the players could be physically fatigued or struggling to perform to their baseline outputs comparing to the first game.
Okay.
We go to the third page. We have some recommendations on recovery and training. Okay, regarding the game versus Cockfosters and what the players achieved, we've put in 2 groups, Group A and Group B. Group A was recovery. That was most of the starting 11 players, and training for the rest of the players that participated in the game. Regarding our recovery, we have some classic methods, some cold water immersion, 10 to 16 Celsius degrees, some contrast bath showers, some active recovery, some mobility exercises, and most of that. Okay. And Group P training, due to the lack of some sprint efforts and some high velocities, we suggest maybe a tempo run, so we
Okay.
can achieve some high-speed running and complete some of that velocity that we're missing. And for the players that did not have as much accelerations and decelerations, maybe a short and high intensity small side game, maybe 3 against 3 with the goalkeeper. So we have those short and intense actions of acceleration and deceleration. And that was a report on the game.
Great.
Thank you very much for listening to us.
No, brilliant. Thanks, George. Well done. Thanks, James. Congratulations. Maybe what I'll do is let's give Liam a go, and then I'll talk through the reports.
Okay, let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, I think that should be fine now. No. Oh no, I can't. Sorry.
Do you need
Okay.
permission, or can you?
No, it's on my preferences on my laptop. It's not allowing me. Let me just.
Oh, really?
You want a MacBook?
Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
know?
This is a classic issue, I think, with Google Meet.
Okay.
Well,
Box.
what? Oh, really? That's
Okay.
interesting. Maybe what we can do is I'll open it on my screen,
Okay.
and then Liam, you can
talk
talk
through
to it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So let's just see. So typically in team meetings, the manager has an analyst standing there over the laptop, because the manager doesn't do any he doesn't do any laptop handling himself, and the analyst has to respond to his instructions. So that will be me.
This brings up a question that I have actually.
Yep, go for it.
I think both of our teams have made the assumption that we have to submit PDFs.
Mm.
But I'm assuming that that's not really the case, and that really the report should be a lot more interactive than that. Something like from Power BI or.
Yeah, so I mean that is a good question. So we do it's an interesting one, because we do deliver into Power BI. That's how we visualize our data.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has access to that Power BI. But the thing is, I've probably spent quite a lot of time trawling through Power BI before,
Yeah.
so I've done the interacting.
Right.
And because the coach doesn't necessarily have time to do all of the interacting and all of the investigation of the data.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm actually extracting from that something, a summary of that, and presenting that to him generally on a PDF.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, Liam, do you want? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to go for it?
Okay, yeah, perfect. So yeah, that's just the basic cover page.
Right.
Yeah, as George mentioned, obviously a game against Cockfosters. So I played on the 28th.
Yep.
3 p.m. kickoff. Yeah.
Great.
All good there.
Yep.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. No, I think that's all right. I can just see that. So yeah. So this is our, I guess, main page. Just sort of comparing the data from the Hoddesdon game and then the Cockfosters game across the metrics of player load, zone 5 distance, which is 19.8 to 25.2, but not including 25.2 kilometers an hour.
Okay.
Distance with zone 6, which is above sprinting, 25.2 kilometers an hour. Number of accelerations above 3 meters per second, and then number of decelerations below 3 meters per second. So across the board, as you can sort of see, I think by the note that I've made there, I've compared, so the color is based off the previous game. So for example, if you look at the column of player load, so that color is in comparison with the other player load from the Cockfosters game. So those, I'm comparing each category by the color itself. So as you can see, there's probably more green on the left against the Hoddesdon Town game, which obviously means, you know, the team probably had higher outputs, and that tends to be across all the metrics I've included in here. So obviously, besides a few exceptions, as you can sort of see in the player load and some of the other high intensities in the second one, the team didn't potentially perform as well physically as what they did in the Hoddesdon Town game. Obviously, that could be due to, you know, a number of factors.
Sure.
And then I've also sort of just put down there, so professional standards. So I just wanted to compare, see where the team was at in terms of their own fitness levels to a potential professional level game. I've got 2 references below where I found those for each position. I think it was from La Liga, if I'm not mistaken. But so obviously different styles of play. Different styles of play there. So
and what measurement system was used for that?
I believe, it was just that they just said like a 10 hertz, so similar to Catapult, like a 10 hertz GPS positioning system. So I believe that's Catapult as well. That's what they use. But so I compared that across all positions. Obviously the accelerations for the team itself, they were higher than probably what the professional standards were. But across the high intensity, the high speed running, and the sprinting, they were generally a little bit lower. Again, for, you know, a certain number of reasons. So what I was actually interested in saying was in the player load. So if you look at Will and Bruno, so those were obviously higher, but their zone 6 and even really their zone 5 running wasn't too high. So I was that was just like an interesting finding I sort of saw from it. So I'd sort of correlate like player load with sort of higher intense running, but obviously that's not the case. So they obviously performed pretty well despite their high speed running and sprinting not being too high. So it could be, again, due to a number of factors. In terms of preparation, but then also potentially lower speed thresholds. So that's something I could like look into in further reports. So if you can just scroll down, I think that's all good on that one. Thank you. So for this one, I was speaking actually to another practitioner about this, but I was sort of trying to define what sort of hard meant in terms of sort of intensity level. So what they were sort of saying was like how they sort of define sort of their training or potential drills in terms of how hard it is. It can be sort of aerobic based or more anaerobic based, which obviously makes sense. But so I broke those down. So a hard work percentage, I guess they sort of mentioned it as like a high metabolic workload. So any sort of distance that was above 19.8 kilometers an hour, which is considered high speed running, or any high intensity accelerations or decelerations, which I included above. So I sort of did an evaluation of the players from the game, and I looked at how much like the percentage of their actual running was considered like hard work. So that high metabolic workload. And then and then their meters per minute, which was more the aerobic sort of base. So
sorry, where's meters per minute?
So that there's 2 categories. So on the table, meters per minute's the orange bars, and then the hard work percentage, the blue bars, and then I've got in the color coordinated table to the right. So ideally in a game, you want sort of like a professional football game, you probably want both to be relatively high. I think in this case, the boys, obviously, Vinny Baker and Matt Gilbert, the 2 outside backs, performed very hard, obviously, with their high speed running and high metabolic workload. So again, that was sort of interesting to see what workload they were working at and at what sort of intensity, what type of intensity. And then obviously I've just included just down below there sort of max speeds for that game itself. Yeah, so and then I think just onto the last or second to last slide. Yeah, yeah. So I've got 3 graphs here. So each broken down into each position. So what I've done is taken the average velocity across the whole game from the 3 defenders, the 4 midfielders, and then the 3 forwards. So just to sort of see how the fluctuation goes. Obviously, the plateau, the lull in the middle is half time.
Yeah.
But all are on the same scale. So it's sort of just interesting to sort of see what sort of areas or parts of the game where they were sort of all working at a pretty similar intensity rate. I think just a notable finding, if you look at the forwards, just at the bottom one, so you can sort of see a drop off towards more the end of the game. Again, I think that could be due to, it could be fatigue, but then also being substituted from the game. So you could take that into account. But it was just sort of interesting to see the fluctuations across the entire game. And then just onto the last one. So as we've spoken about, the more or less same different protocol. So what I'd recommend, what we recommended anyway, was for the starting 11 pretty much all on recovery, and then based off the data from the rest of the players, we sort of determined whether they needed more high intensity or volume, what was sort of more required for their top up running for the training the next day or after the game itself. So obviously they've all got their own sort of protocols there. And then for the recovery guys, I just included a little, I think in the past, the best sort of buy-in that I've had anyway as a player myself is having like a point system for recovery. So as George mentioned, there's a lot of different ideas there that you could chuck in, and the idea is to accumulate 100 points at the end of the day to help with the recovery overall. Thank you.
Okay, well done. Thank you. Good. So stop presenting. Thanks, Liam. Thanks, James. Thanks, George. Any comments amongst yourselves?
I have to say that I really liked Liam's team report on this one. It had a lot of stuff that were like too detailed, and I like that. To be honest, we struggled a bit with our data because we're trying to do something similar that Liam did with the average velocity throughout the game, and we struggled a bit with that, so we didn't include that. We had it in mind as well, so Liam can give us a small heads up on that, how he managed that.
Okay, good.
But I really liked Liam's reports, and I have to say that we struggled a bit on this one, and we're trying to differentiate our report on how we did this one to the other one.
Okay, all right.
I think just to echo what George said, I think I really like the visualization side of Liam's. It's really concise, I think, to the point. They show exactly what they mean.
Well, okay, so let me have a go at giving some feedback and chip in. But like I've always said, first of all, thanks so much for doing this, and this is real. These are real usable reports. So Malcolm and Nick, the 2 coaches, are using these reports, and it's really helpful for them, and it's really interesting for the players as well to get this kind of feedback and to know that somebody's sort of taken the care to turn GPS signals into information that they can use. But obviously I've done a lot of these things, so let me share some of what it is that I've really sort of discovered in that time. So let's start with the scanners report. So you know, what we've got on the first page is player outputs, and that's what I generally, well, there are a couple of things that I would want to see early on. What I traditionally do, and obviously it's harder for you to do this because you have limited data, but the data set is growing, is I'm quite interested to have an overview of the match compared to previous matches of the entire squad output. What we've got here is we've got total accelerations, total decelerations, and I'm interested in that. And it looks like the scale of the maximums is different from the scale of the totals. And I think that's kind of a challenge where maybe it's worth looking into having maximums and totals in different tables altogether, just because the numbers are so different. And then I think what is nice about this is that you've actually labeled the position right in the chart. I think that's helpful. And maybe what it would have been worth doing is actually group all of the positions together. So I don't know if you've done them by, it looks like you've done them in alphabetical order of their first name. But it might be worth actually grouping them by position rather than by alphabetical order, because that means that I can start to look for patterns between defenders, forwards, and midfielders. So that's an initial comment. Then possibly the same, and you know, so much of this is it's all great and important information, and the comments I'm making are almost more just like data visualization comments rather than sports science comments. So another one here would be that by the time you've put the maximum velocity, and just by the way, maximum velocity is the you know, it is the one metric that players, at least in my experience, love to look at. So it's a great metric to have. Everybody wants to know about it. We had a match a little while ago where one of the midfielders, his maximum velocity was actually lower than the maximum velocity of the goalkeeper. And, you know, everybody thought that was just brilliant. But what it does mean is that if you display maximum velocity on the same chart as you've done sprint counts, it means that the scale has thrown out, and it can be a little hard to actually gain meaning from that. So this is one of the challenges of data visualization is it is really scales. And how do you take multiple metrics, all with different scales, and put them together in an intelligible form? That's one of the challenges of a graph. So, you know, what we got here with total distance and distance in zone 5+6 is because I think, so I can't quite, yeah, so this is what you were saying, George, is that the actual data label didn't come up, and, you know, that's fine. But in general, I'm guessing these are on different scales also, because I wouldn't expect total distance in zone 6 to be such a big chunk of total distance. But anyway, you know, that's something to have a look at. And once again, it comes back to the same question, that scale is a real challenge when you're trying to present this kind of information. Game-to-game comparison, great idea, you know, really like this, and useful to look at. A couple of things I'd throw in there is, one of the things we try and do when we speak to coaches is don't use the word good and bad. Because if you really, if you're not careful, more is just regarded as good and less is regarded as bad. And, you know, I worked with a manager a few years ago, and he kind of believed this. He just thought the more you ran, you know, the better it was. And we had a centre back who played in the middle of the back three. And if you're a good centre back playing in the middle of the back three, you don't run a lot, and you're definitely not going to run as much as, you know, wingers or midfielders. And the coach couldn't quite get his head around the fact that this player, who was doing exactly what the coach had asked him to do, was not getting high running numbers. And the player was quite suspicious of our sports science department. And it was only when I explained to him that actually, if you're a defender, sometimes running less is good, that he sort of started to trust us. So, you know, great table, because I'm extremely interested to see these differences between Hoddesdon and the Cockfosters match. But you know, a little bit careful with good, acceptable, and bad, and the same goes for, now we use red and green ourselves, but you've got to be a little careful with those colors, because of the sort of traditional associations of red and green. Then, you know, great to have some comparison data. And, you know, these are theoretical reasons, not pressing the ball, no space to run, and so on. Another factor could be just ball and play time, which obviously you don't have access to. So that's what we find is that ball and play time tends to affect the lower intensity metrics. So you'll get less distance when ball and play time is low, but often you get just as much high speed running. That's not affected by ball and play time. And then the recommendations, you know, a really nice, concise table here. So this is a table that really instantly makes sense to me, and I can really digest that quickly. So I'd almost say, you know, this is the kind of standard that we're looking to take a table as easy as this one is to read. Let's see if we can make the other ones as easy to read as this. And then some nice recovery interventions, you know, that's great. That's some proper sports science there. And some nice training interventions as well. Also, you know, some relevant sports science. So, you know, well done and thank you. And that's the scanners report. Any comments on that? Any questions?
I think as we've gone on, it's always kind of been an iterative process, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
Even after we submitted our report, I think we continued to work on it and try and improve it. And I think just hearing that feedback is validating to some of the improvements that we've made already. I think, so for example, I'm just going to quickly share my screen if that's all right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So this is something that we'd kind of translated our previous graphs into.
Like it, yeah.
So for example, the labels on the right kind of show the positions, and we've tried to color coordinate where possible.
Okay.
So this is obviously something that we're going to be striving for in the future rather than the initial attempt that we had.
Great. And okay, so first of all, it looks nice. You know, I like the colors that you've chosen. And that just looks really interesting. Okay. All right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's obviously, this is like you said, it's iterative all the time. So
yes. And James, what you're saying about iterations, we iterated for 5 years. You know, we just kept going and going and going, and we've stopped now. We've declared a pause on it because we were working on other projects. But that's, you know, that's how long it took.
Yeah.
So yeah, well done for having something up and running as quickly as this. You know, it's a very strong foundation. Liam, should I talk about yours?
Yeah. If none of the other guys have. I don't have any questions myself or anything. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let me share my screen again. Yeah. Okay. So there's nice detail on the cover page here, and you know, the seasons do tick by. So I think, you know, 28th of the 1st, 23, 3 p.m. kickoff, all of that is useful information. I don't know if they actually told you whether it was home or away, but you know, we try and capture that as well. Okay, so you've gone with a table, and you know, I've said before, I think color-coded tables are one of the ways to overcome the problem of scale, where you've got multiple metrics with different numbers. So what you're able to do here, Liam, is you've taken say you've taken a metric where you've got, say, 1,000, and you're able to put it on the same table when you've got another number of a 6. And that would not be possible in a chart, but it is possible in a color-coded table, especially when you format, for the specific metrics. So that's nice to see. And then also the professional standards, that's fascinating. And that's what a lot of these guys, will be really interested in, is to compare themselves against the pros. So that'll be interesting for them as well. In terms of the table itself, I think the one thing that we ended up doing is, instead of having a spectrum, a continuous spectrum from one color to the next, we actually chose to block it in just 5 different shades or 5 different colors. So we ended up with dark green, light green, blue, light red, and dark red as our 5. And we just found, sometimes you find these sort of oranges and yellows that they can sort of fade into each other a little bit, and they don't really jump out at you. And then the other thing that we tried to do is we wanted our color coding to really draw the eye to where we wanted attention to be. So what we've done is the middle 60%, so between 20% and 80% is actually blue. That's the middle color. And it seems like quite a big chunk, but it means that you're only looking at the top 20 and the bottom 20% of your data. So that's just our solution. And, it's I'm not prescribing, but it's something to try. Then, okay, really great, amount of information here. And I think the challenge with a table, the nice thing about a visualization is visualizations look great, and they're generally easier to understand because you can, you see the size of the bar, the box, or the line, or whatever, and it sort of intuitively tells you how big something is. Here, we've actually got to look at the numbers, and that's harder. So this is one of the disadvantages of a table, is you get a lot of numbers thrown at you. Color coordination is one way of trying to manage that. But the other way I want to manage it is I want to avoid having that my eye has to jump from one side to the other as much as possible. So what you've got here, very valuable information, is Ollie Skinner player load 426, 343. But I've got to jump from there to there to make that comparison. And every single metric that I want to, every single comparison I want to make, I've got to be jumping across the page. And I think in the table, is there a way of getting these numbers together per metric? So that, I think that's a challenge. And then the other challenge I would give to you is, the third thing I've got to do on this page is take these numbers and relate them to these numbers here. And again, could I possibly take these numbers and use them as color coding? Because what I've done here is I've color coded one match to the next, which is great. Could I color code a match according to the professional standards? And that would make it easier. What that would mean is that I don't have to jump from this table to that table, which is difficult for me to do. So, and I think the last thing I was going to say about this, and George and James, I saw you did this in your report, is I really do need to be told what these distances are. I don't want to have to remember that. So I want to know what zone 5 is and zone 6 and all of that. And one more point on that is just a question of how many speed thresholds do we want? Because our speed thresholds are 3 km/h intervals. So we go 18 km/h, 21, 24, 27, and 30. And the reason why we do that is that we find there's a relatively low correlation between those. So when people have, for example, people say high speed running is above 21 km/h and sprinting is above 25 km/h. First of all, sprinting is not above 25 km/h when these guys can run at 36, 37 km/h. That's not a sprint. But also, you might have one player who's covered relatively a lot of distance above 27 and 30 k's an hour, but relatively little distance above 21 and 24 k's an hour, and someone else has done exactly vice versa. So that's why we like having a lot of speed thresholds. And then the same for me would go for accelerations and decelerations, because a 3 meter per second acceleration is a mid-range acceleration. But I'm quite interested in the low range and the high range accelerations as well. We measure up to 4.5 meters per second as our sort of top category. And we measure all the way down to 1.5 meters per second, positive in the accels and negative in the decels. So that's another sort of concept there. But, you know, as a first page, lots of information and really, you know, really enlightening information. So this is the kind of stuff that every single player who gets hold of this report, I think, is going to be looking through it and going, oh, that's, you know, that really interests me. So well done for that. Okay, so then, you know, you've had a real crack, and, you know, so far you've been, I think, the only one, Liam, who's had a real crack at this intensity question that I keep asking. And let me just talk about it a little bit more. You know, so once again, if you just look at these, you've run into the problem of scale once again, because meters per minute and hard work percentage don't really match in terms of scale. So, you know, that's a challenge. You could try using a double axis chart. But what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the actual concepts of how you measure intensity, because this is really important. And the thing is, unless in intensity, just the definition of the word implies some kind of time factor, because I can run at 19.8 kilometers an hour for 1 second. It's not very difficult. 2 seconds gets a little more difficult. 30 seconds, it gets more difficult. 60 seconds, it becomes extremely difficult. So unless I'm considering the impact of time, I can't really calculate intensity, because not all running at a given speed is the same. And, you know, if somebody has run 200 meters without a break at 20 kilometers an hour, it's extremely different from somebody who's done it 10 times. So that's really something to factor in. And then the other thing you have to factor in is intensity doesn't just come from running, it comes from acceleration as well. So what you've really got to consider, and James, you know, this might be one for you with your background, is if you can factor in time, acceleration, deceleration, and speed, can you factor that into making a calculation of intensity? And then, you know, on that, the meters per minute is, I think this here is a calculation of total meters per minute. Now, for me, meters per minute is interesting. It's good information. I think it's worth just checking out. There's a big variation here, unless Adam is the goalkeeper, in which case even goalkeepers should move more than that. But yes, meters per minute is interesting because it allows a direct comparison of who's kind of covered the most distance. But meters per minute gets very interesting when I actually plot it by minute, because then I can start to see the fluctuations in the game. And, you know, one of the challenges with, well, there are a couple of challenges with these charts, Liam, I'm sure, you know, you can see, is that, first of all, when I have average defender velocity, in some ways it's interesting, but then football is such a stop-start, it's such an intermittent sport, that this line graph of velocity loses a lot of information. So one of the challenges is, instead of having all of these peaks, can I smooth that information in some way? And a way in which I can smooth it is if I plot meters per minute, minute by minute. So how much distance was traveled in minute 1? How much distance was traveled in minute 2, minute 3, minute 4, all the way through the 90 minutes of the match? That will then smooth this graph, and it'll give me a better feel of where the high intent, where more distance was covered and where less distance was covered. And then I can plot that by the team and by the overall players as well. So, so that's almost the most basic measure of intensity, is meters per minute plotted minute by minute or second by second or whatever you want to do. And then, you know, James, I'm sort of keep pointing at you here, but could you factor in accelerations per minute, or could you factor in, you know, something like that? Can you come up with a more nuanced line graph of how hard people are working? Then, you know, same as in the scanners report, you've got peak speeds. And like I said, you know, players love to look at peak speeds. We had a player the other day, he hit 36.5, establishing himself as the fastest player in the squad. He was really chuffed about that. A couple of weeks later, someone else went and did 37.1 and kind of blew him out the water a little bit. But, you know, the guys like to talk about peak speed, so it's nice to have it in there. I think a hard question that needs to get asked is radar plot versus line graph. You know, I know radar plots do get used in football a lot, but I think, you know, it's a question always with any visualization is it's just got to make things as absolutely easy as possible. And here, for example, I don't even know if I don't know how easy it is to compare this 30.23 to that 25. You know, I'm just reading data labels here. Whereas if it was a bar chart, I'd be able to actually look at the size of the, I think it would be easier to make a relative comparison there. Yeah, so I've already commented on this one. And then, you know, I can see you guys are really clear thinking in your actual sports science. So just as with the scanners report, a really nice, don't know what that's doing, a really nice final page with recommendations, just clear, straightforward information. And, you know, this points recovery system, Liam, I think it's a great idea. And you know, really good to give some player education there as well. So so those, you know, are my comments on both of the reports. But you know, like I said at the beginning, very usable information, very valuable information. You know, thanks so much for doing it. And as I said previously, for actually having the initiative to do it. And, you know, as James said, it's iterations, you know, and let's keep going with this, because I think the ability to have a kind of a match report that has passed through these iterations is a nice asset to own. So well done.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liam, as well, for sharing yours as well. It's nice.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it was actually really good to hear how you broke it down. Actually, James, what you pulled up just before was actually really interesting to see. Tim, I just had one question based off what you're sort of saying.
Yes.
With like the zones that you're sort of, the speed zones you're talking about, will that sort of like vary based on sort of age or like standard of playing, so like professional versus like amateur or like academy?
So interesting question, and a question we debated a lot ourselves. So, you know, we monitor academy players, we monitor women players, and we monitor men players. And in general, you find that women players are about 10% slower, kind of on average, than men players. So you could say maybe you would be, if you were to take those thresholds, you would maybe drop them by 3 k's an hour, because you're going to get relevant data there. What we find with some of the academy players, is particularly the guys in the older age groups, is that a lot of them actually run more than the pros. And in fact, we had a a men's team player who was coming back from an injury. Or no, he wasn't. He was doing a preseason. And he went and played an under-18 game, and he said it's absolutely shattered. He said these guys just didn't stop running. And I think sometimes when the ball is bouncing around a little bit more, and you chasing after it, there's maybe more running than there really needs to be. So with the older age groups of the academy, we tend to use the same thresholds. But the real, the thing is, the thresholds themselves, the exact thresholds themselves are not that important. It's giving them context. So the thing is, let's say what's normal for you is to run 50 meters a match above 30 k's an hour, and what's normal for me is to run 10 meters per match above 30 k's an hour. And we can still both use that 30 kilometer an hour category, but it's just that we've made it sort of relevant or contextualized to what it is that I normally do. What were you going to say, James?
I was just going to say, does that mean that you would look at kind of doing comparative analysis? So, for example, your centre halves do this proportion of running in zones 6, for example, compared to your midfielders, and that proportion then doesn't look at the absolute values anymore. It just looks at the comparison between different positions. Now that can obviously be translated into other.
Yes. So what I don't want in this is I don't want to kind of tell you what I do and then everybody copies that, because I'm really looking forward to your guys' fresh ideas, and hearing what you come up with and seeing what you come up with. So I really welcome that creativity and a fresh insight. But the question, I think in some ways, I might want to have multiple contexts, because the one concept is what have I done relative to myself? Another context is what have I done relative to my position? And a third context is what have I done relative to the team? So those could be some context. And then another context would be what have the defenders done relative to what they've normally done? What have the defenders done relative to other positions? That's more context. And, like I said earlier, and George, I think you referred to this when you spoke about the D cells, for example, is, I can start to get a little feel for how the game has gone when I start to look at some of those patterns. I can at least speculate. And that's quite a nice thing when you're actually able to deliver that to the coach. And, hopefully what we can do the next time we do these presentations is we can actually have one of the coaches here. And then when you are speculating, as you will, it means that the coach can actually match that with his own understanding of the game.
Yeah, that will be pretty helpful and useful for us as well to understand if our data are correlating to what we're assuming or thinking of what happened to the game.
Yeah.
I have another question. Is it possible for us to have because we have some players missing their positions, we couldn't accurately find what position each player had. So can you have a detailed squad list or
all right. Okay, well,
positions
yes.
stuff?
Will you just post that on the group chat, George, and then Nick or Malcolm can answer that? Yeah, that's a very good question. And any other information you want, if you want heights, weights, ages, that kind of thing. I don't know exactly if they've got all of that, but you can at least ask the question.
Okay.
They'll definitely have ages.
Yeah, and something else that I think that I was thinking about it that could be useful for us as well to correlate some data that we have is if the team is using RP, so we could use that into our reports and see that if this correlates with what the player have done in the game.
Okay. Okay. Will you put that on the chat as well?
Yeah.
And it may be that they can get somebody to collect RPE.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's think about that, because all right, you know, RPE is obviously very valuable in some ways, and the one limitation of RPE in the environment I work in is players often want to know why you're asking about RPE. So, you know, we have players just trying to think what the right number is, and then they just tell us that number. So if they think it's a session where they're supposed to have worked hard, then they'll give it a high number. If it's a session where they think, you know, it's just before a match, they'll tell us it was easy because they're feeling great. You know, that kind of thing can happen. But in this environment, hopefully there's going to be less of that game playing and more, you know, just an honest answer, in which case RPE becomes, you know, a really nice information to have. So no, great suggestion. Let's see if we can gather that information.
Okay, and last question, and I think I'm done with questions.
Yeah, right.
Okay, you mentioned that about the speed zones that you cycle through 3 kilometers. So let's say we start from 20
Correct.
kilometers, we go up to 30 kilometers.
Yep.
So basically that that throws off zone 5 and zone 6, right? So we have to like label different speed zones with different, let's say, labels at this moment.
Yep. That's what we do, you know, and James, this will be easy for you. Is we just calculate those zones and those thresholds ourselves.
Yeah, because what you said is actually like true, that now a sprint is not 25 kilometers, it's like 30 and above that. So we should like change our baselines on what like literature and like all of the other software regard as speed zones.
Yes, I would want to define those speed zones myself. And, you know, if I'm looking at the data and I mean, what you showed me in your reports, one of the conclusions, and again, you know, you've made the point that we've only watched 2 games so far, so, you know, totally relevant, but I'm seeing top speeds of sort of 30. Was there 31 in there from somebody?
I think it was a 30.
Was it a 30? So then for me, we're not going to get that much from the 30k an hour. That might be interesting if there's one really quick guy, but I probably have a maximum of, I'm going for a maximum of around 90% of the top speeds that I'm seeing. So for us, we're a little further off that, because we get guys hitting speeds of, you know, 36, 37. There not a lot of people are going above 35k's an hour. Doesn't happen.
True. So actually we're gonna, sorry to interrupt you. So actually we're gonna like compare what we have relative to what the team is doing. So let's say we're gonna establish baselines of what we have throughout, let's say 2-3 games, that this is the baseline, this is the threshold, so we're gonna go with these zones.
And my top, you know, for me, and again, like what I'm really keen for here is I really want to see your creativity and your ideas. So, you know, don't be limited by what I'm doing. But what we currently do is our top threshold is round about 90% of an average top speed. So an average top speed for us is 33k's an hour. So we've set the top threshold at 30k's an hour, if you see what I mean. So if the top speed, you know, it might be 27 or something like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have some general questions, but kind of outside of the analysis of the reports and the data.
Okay, yeah.
How long do you see this going on for?
Well, so this really, well, maybe then I'll stop the recording and we can just chat. So any more questions on this? Okay, stopping the recording. So thanks everyone. Here goes the recording. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It still says it's recording though.
Yes, it does. Okay, I think manage recording, stop recording, the blue button, not the red button.